Okay, and we going.
Well, good morning. Welcome to OD Talk number 789. That, hey, we've been in lockdown and now in this sort of not lockdown, but lockdown for so long. And these conversations have become a fixture for us in any case, something that we look forward to every Wednesday. Because we can explore interesting issues and themes and questions. So today's topic arose from the conversation we had 2 weeks ago, was that, where we explored what are the kinds of issues people are experiencing right now, especially in this shift to this hybrid world, half digital, half face-to-face, not quite knowing which way. And one of the things that have come up was this question of, well, I think it was expressed in many ways, and you would have seen some of our messages have sort of maybe contributed to these many ways and the confusion of the many ways. The one is it seems that not everyone is connecting into this space. There's a degree of disengagement taking place, and we're wondering about that, about what this disengagement is. The specific theme that came up was, are we hearing all voices? Are all voices still included? And I think one of the quick things that we often jump to as early practitioners, wrongly maybe, is that it is because people fear to speak up. Maybe that's part of the reason, but I have my doubts about that. So in today's conversation, I think what we want to explore is this question of disconnection or disengagement in this world, and what can we do about that? And yesterday when we had a conversation about it, it was, okay, so people are disengaging, and we've got some techniques and practices that we think are cool, that we can use. We have ways to include people in a conversation like this, etc. But then for me, it became a deeper question about what are we talking about when we talk about disconnection? What is happening? And I guess, Liezel, to kick off the conversation, the first thing that I would like to ask you is, you're experiencing this in the organization, that some people are disappearing, that there's perhaps a little bit of a loss of the tightness of the community that you had in the organization, that there's a loss in the depth of the connections between people, that you don't see people for months because they don't switch on their video while they are on Zoom calls, that people are beginning to be quite unwilling to come into the office sometimes. I guess that depends a lot on personality as well. What is it that you are experiencing? Is it true that voices have gone quiet? And if voices have gone quiet in the organizational space, whose voices have gone quiet? Who are the ones that we are beginning to miss, that are beginning to drop out? that are beginning to disappear. And that we miss or don't even realize that we don't miss. And how is your experience of that? What's your experience of?
Yeah, so I think, well, there's so many aspects. So there's stages. Where in our talk 2 weeks ago, quite a few people said that they were all excited and everybody was going for it, and they were positive about making this thing happen and making it work in the beginning of lockdown, and they've lost that momentum. So it's gone dark and quiet, and videos are never on, and everybody's on mute, and people are just not there anymore. They're preparing lunch or dinner, or actually dropping kids while they just switch onto Teams or Zoom on their phone, and they're in the dark and they're not interested. So I think that was one of the things that came up for me that was interesting, because if you had great team participation back in April and now you've lost that, then it's definitely something that you're going to feel. And I think that's probably something that's almost easier to do something about than the organizations who's never had that. And I mean, we know as OD practitioners, we always have check-ins and breakaways and small group conversations and things like that. So for us, it's normal. We get the voices heard. But for a lot of people in a lot of organizations, that's not normal. The two big corporates that I worked with in the past 2 weeks both have the policy of everybody doesn't have enough data, so you just don't switch on your camera. And because I was doing the Enneagram session with the one, I forced them to switch on their cameras. And it was a big, noisy Zoom thing with like 28 faces going, oh, hey, Pete, look at you, you've grown a beard. My goodness, it's nice to see you. I haven't seen you for 7 months, blah, 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 blah. That kind of conversation. I had to give them about 10 minutes to get that over with so we can start again.
Yeah.
And to me, that was just like, oh my goodness. Where we, and I don't know whether it's because we're OD people, we've seen each other virtually twice a day, every single day, if not more often, if there's more meetings, and a few times gone to the office just to be together. So that's the social part of just to see each other and maybe have a drink and have some conversation. So
do you think they don't realize that they miss each other?
Yeah, I think you get so used to it. So maybe earlier on you felt a gap, but now we're used to it. And maybe the organizational culture had something to do with it. It's never been a place where people had voices. And then I also think there's this Zoom fatigue. Christo, you used a very nice term yesterday that I loved. You said, our calendars looks like Tetris. It does. It looks like Tetris. So there's no gaps, no breaks. And you literally have to switch off your camera and your mic so that you can fix lunch while listening to a meeting, because you haven't had a break in 4 hours. You haven't been up from your chair, that kind of thing. So I guess there's that as well.
It's almost like there's a loss of slow time. Everything becomes, I mean, we already lived in a world where we lived in terms of the strict calendar with meetings, with days, etc., and we live according to the calendar. And that was tough enough. I mean, if you are like me, who actually prefers to live by the moon and the phases of the moon. That's no joke. Yeah, so it becomes very hard to fit into 31 days or 30 days or 28 days or 7 days or 5 days. And, the weekend is supposed to be those days, etc. But now it's become even more regulated. And what has become regulated out of the calendar is downtime, off time.
Well,
Nothing.
maybe, and maybe it's just driving to the next meeting or walking between meetings and grabbing a
Yeah.
coffee.
Yeah.
And I think what's completely gone is water cooler conversation.
Yeah.
And Carol always says when she's on these calls, so she's the head of HR for a medium-sized company. She says, I could look at people when I walk past their desks to see if they're okay. Now you can't do that. So you also don't know when to reach out. And in the beginning, all the articles and stuff said, rather over-communicate, connect with your people, have one-on-ones, have conversations about what's your home life like, what's your situation, and stuff like that. And maybe there has been some of that, and there's the fatigue of that as well, or just people who's not necessarily comfortable with doing it.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm hearing in conversations with clients is performance are dropping, deliverables are, the deliverables are not being delivered, timelines are not being met, and people don't know who to count on anymore. It's almost like they've lost that thing of teamwork, because it's so hard to navigate who's doing what and what are we going to do together as a team. The definition of a team is we have counter dependencies. Now, if you're counter dependent and you haven't seen your team for 8 months, you haven't seen their faces. And
it's that when you co-located, you have an almost implicit all hands on deck. So if I remember in our office, you and Roy would have a conversation, and it would be impossible for me not to eavesdrop and not to have an opinion, not to jump in and not to explore further. And now if, let's say, you and Roy, or you and I, or I and Roy have conversation, it is closed. And there's not a shout across the office, can you help me, or pass me that, or how are we coming along with that project, or what's happening, etc., etc.
Yeah, there's a lot missing. I still get a lot of people going, oh, no, I'm loving this work from home thing. And sure, I like it as well, but I personally miss the personal connection. And like you say, just like having a spontaneous conversation.
Yeah.
And being able to chat, because in the online sessions, it's very much if you make a sound, you're interrupting, and everybody else's sound drops off. Yeah, Christy, there's
it's
so
interesting
much
because there's something around the flow of our interaction that changes. I'd love to hear from some of the other guests how you are experiencing this. Samuel, Marie.
I would just like to add that I think we really underestimated just the value of what physical spaces represent for people. And that sometimes the organization it's a container for the culture, because there is something around the deck where all the smokers go and smoke and have informal conversation. There is something around, to your point, you walk past somebody's desk and they're not there, and then you actually inquire around where are they, and there's something informal that happens in the container of the space, of the physical environment, that just got lost when people work from home. And I think it did two things. In an environment where people were naturally connected, I think it wasn't hard for them to reconnect online. But in organizations where already, the culture is fragmented, where people don't talk to each other, they speak because they have to be physically in the meeting with each other, I think it just got exacerbated when people had to be on Zoom. Now it's like, I don't have to see you. I can actually have the option to switch off my camera, because previously, actually, it was quite contrived. I had to be in the board meeting with you. So I think two things happen. I think it just exacerbates stuff that probably was already broken. And two, we really underestimated the real value of that, the informal conversation that happened in the physical building of being together.
Yeah. It's such
yeah, those are just the two things that are coming up.
It's such an interesting thing, the thing about it, because if you speak of all hands on deck, in a physical space, it's almost literally, we know where the deck is.
Yeah.
Or as you say, the deck where the smokers meet. And we can see if someone is absent. We can see someone is not there, or as Carol thing of, we can see if someone is not doing well. We have that physical
contact, yeah.
Yes, it was almost the loss of the physical, and as you say, we underestimate that. I wonder, you mentioned that, and for me, this was almost dogma at the beginning of lockdown, was the teams that were doing well, that had close connection, would go into the virtual space, and they would also have close connection. And I think that proved true, is they have close, the teams that are close have maintained close connection. At the same time, I wonder if they feel the physical proximity more keenly than the other teams. Now I'm thinking of this team that Liezel has been working with. We're not close, and for 9 or however many months, 6 months, they switched off the video, and they're happy to see each other. But geez, if someone didn't say to them, switch on your cameras, they may have not seen each other for another 6 months, and not only grown beers but gone bald in the meantime.
Well, Christo, and then there's so that one was fine, because I said to them, switch on, and I warned them before the time. So I said, when, in preparation, please know that I'm going to, because the first time I did that, they had excuses. They said, no, I'm still in my pajamas. I'm not switching on my camera. So I sent them all an email and said, I'm going to make you switch on your camera next time. So put on your makeup, brush your hair. But the other company that I worked with, their policy is not to. And when I did a talk for them last week, the week before, they actually phoned me before the time and said, please do not ask people to switch on their cameras, because our policy is we do not pay for the data for our employees. So we do not ask them to switch on their cameras. And I had to go redesign a little piece of my talk, because my talk was about managing high performance teams remotely. And I wanted to challenge them about cameras on and cameras off. And if that's the policy, it doesn't help I go and do that. But anyway, so that's one that they won't see each other. And maybe it's a whole year, because the more I'm listening, the more I'm hearing people saying, we might go back by February, we might go back by March. And then on the other hand, there's theories that South Africa might be back in lockdown by March.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You see, what comes up for me is the question about organizational communities, because we make a lot of organizational community and say that it's very important. And organizations also tend to make a lot of organizational community in all sorts of funny ways. They have organizational values, and they have wellness days, and they have, we are the people of this organization. And I'm beginning to see that as corporate propaganda. And I have a deep skepticism about it, because it seems to me that in many organizations, people are actually quite happy not to see each other for long periods of time. And it actually really doesn't matter that much to them. And actually, they don't care that much for their fellow employees, except maybe personal friendships and in some cases, close team relationships that have developed. So this whole idea of the organization as a community, years ago, many years ago, probably about 2 decades, I read a book, and I wish I could remember who was the author. It was a brilliant book. The name of the book was Imagined Communities, and it was about the nation state. And I think in a similar way, the organization is an imagined community. It's a community with a certain ideology and professed values and all of that corporate stuff that they put on the walls. And the things they do to raise employee engagement and all of that stuff. And if we are really seeing that the organization is really the large organization, the 5,000 people organization, or the 10,000 person organization, or 50 or 100,000, which is in any case like a small city. Those are really just imagined communities, and that our human links to each other is, except where it's very personal, is actually quite tenuous.
Mm.
And what does that mean if we have theories of, but you also say, Liezel, that people are seeing performance dropping. I'd love to hear from the others. Are you seeing similar things, and what is the effect on performance? Or so what? So what? So if people don't connect to each other, at least they have their families.
Can I suggest that we go into breakaways?
Yes, let's do that.
And have some chats and then come back.
Yeah.
I'm also interested in this morning on the radio, there was, they said that people are talking about they're losing innovation and new ideas, and creativity is lost in the organization since working this way. So that was interesting. What I've heard is motivation is out the window. Obviously, if we're not connected and we've gone quiet, then there's no engagement. Roy, it's like you said in your newsletter last week, it's you've actually physically become invisible. Yeah, so I'm wondering if we can all like have smaller conversations and then come feedback about what is it that we're seeing, whether it's now we're consultants and we work in clients, or whether you're part of a corporate, or it's friends around I don't know, do we still braai? Whatever, wherever you see people. I don't want to promote anything that's frowned upon. But yeah, what are you hearing? What are you hearing and seeing? And even have you heard or seen ideas on what to do about it? Or are people just complaining at this point? Yeah.
Two groups.
So we've gone down to 11. We've lost 2 people. We were 13. Maybe 3 groups?
I think 2.
2.
Yeah. 2 and enough time.
Create 2 breakout rooms. Yeah, and then we do like 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah. I think that's good.
Okay. And off you go. Please please accept. You've been invited to join.
But it's here.
Yeah.
Curious. On our side, there's been a very, very interesting conversation about motivation and the contract between the organization and the people of the organization. Dana, Marie, Roy, you want to say a little bit more about that?
Roy, the floor is yours. Or the screen is yours, rather.
The question came up around specifically for leaders around motivation. Marie expressed the sentiment of, what's in it for me? you know, as the leader. And I think that the contract fundamentally changed between the organization and the leaders and the people. You know, what's expected of them, what was expected of them in February, and what's expected of them now, if you think about it as a transaction, you know, plainly as a transaction. If it's just a job, I don't connect to purpose, just a transaction. What is required of a leader who has had the most incredibly horrible journey, you know, trying to steer a holy ship and keep the sailors on board and get away from the storm. What's expected of leaders is far greater and probably for far less money. So the contract on what matters, why are we here, what are we working on, you know, at a foundational level needs to be re-examined. So you know, Marie's question around motivation, I think may stand true for any of the actors in the culture, any of the people in an organization. And what emerged from that is what, you know, what can we do? You know, what is the work? How do we start to have a conversation about these things? And what matters in that conversation?
Marie, you used the words what, something that we need to reconsider is what do we value as a collective, and the shift in, or people asking themselves the question, what really matters. And it sounds to me also there are questions here in the organization that what do we mean by leadership, and what is really important to us as an organization? That, you know, the old contract covered it in a sort of a bureaucratic fashion. But it seems that bureaucratic, Peter Block uses this thing, he speaks about the bureaucratic contract, which patriarchal contract, which basically means that the organization says to the employees, I look after you guys, and what I want in the return is obedience, and you must fit in. And now we reach at a point where the organization does not actually look after you. So now you're asking yourself a whole lot of questions because the contract has indeed collapsed. But so for me, there's some of those questions that arise. Who is the organization? Who is the collective? What's the boundaries of this collective? What matters to this collective? What do we mean by leadership within this collective? What do we mean? What really matters? In what ways do people matter to us? And does it matter to be connected? What is the value of being connected to each other? All kinds of things like that comes up as huge, fundamental, existential questions in the organization.
Yeah, I think you're spot on in how you've explained that. And Liezel, we extended the conversation to more than just leaders, and your example around the people that don't switch on their cameras. And when we're speaking about motivation, as to say, but you know, the question might be if at a transactional level the organization doesn't pay for my data, what is going to motivate me to go the extra mile? What is it in it for me to connect with my colleagues? Because, you know, the fundamental as to why I joined this organization and where I find myself today has shifted. And that's what we need to work on around people's motivation, because the old-fashioned gimmicks of motivating people are just not going to work right now. And I think that the work of OD and leadership is to say, how do we speak to the collective why? And if the group would allow me, please, to introduce another idea that I had, or maybe I'll bring that up in the end. It just came up for me. Sorry, Christo, as you're speaking. But we can talk about that a little bit later.
Maybe you must just go it out there. Hey?
Yeah.
Because ideas have this funny thing of disappearing.
I think what we're asking for right now is really, you know, authentic connection with people, right? And as you were speaking to Ingrid, you know, you said you were curious around organizations that get this right. And what I'm observing around, the perception of the organization that get it right is the people that are, they're connected, their cameras are on, they're speaking all the time. And even some of that I'm seeing as it's motivated by fear. I'm seeing people that are on Zoom calls till 10 o'clock because actually there's this inherent fear that if people don't see me, they don't hear me, when people are going to start to restructure, I don't want to be the first to go. So people are also, the idea of living up to a high performance culture is no longer motivated by the right things. It's the fear of I need to be seen, I need to be heard. And so I'm connecting with 100 stakeholders and 50 of the employees, and I'm sending out reports, and I'm continuously seeking connection, not because of the value of it, but of the fear of what happens if I disappear in this organization. So it just came up for me to say that the idea that people are really connected is not an indication of authentic connection. It could potentially also be influenced by fear.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point.
It is fascinating.
This whole driven busyness, and that makes people's calendars so full. And that's why you have to be on every meeting, whether you have to be on that meeting or not. And why your whole day gets fragmented, and why actually I think people experience increased loneliness. So, but that's a whole different story.
Christo, can I maybe just share personal experience? And I think maybe I've been, and if I listen to what everybody is saying, maybe I've been quite lucky to be involved in a quite an intensive project over the past few months. And most of these questions never came up in the team that I work with, because we had a specific deliverable, we had a specific purpose. We knew that the organization's future depends a lot on this project, and we had to do this all remotely. And for me, the purpose was almost driving this whole way. That it was the technology was the tool just to enable this. Now we've reached a point where things have gone down, or we've reached a specific objective, and now all of a sudden there's a slump in motivation, and I can relate to what is being said here, and I also see that around me, is that I don't say disconnection, but that whole drive as all of a sudden disappeared. So my question is just, is purpose and where I fit into the objectives that we're trying to reach, is that not something that we need to focus a little bit more on, to help people find connection with that? What do I contribute? What is my role? And then leadership, making sure that people understand that purpose, that people deliver on what is expected, not in a fearful way, but in helping them understand where their contribution is making a difference in the organization and in the bigger world.
Samuel, what stands out for me in what you say is two words. The one word is project, which immediately implies a boundary, a clear purpose, a deliverables, something to work towards. So you don't have to go search for some vague organizational purpose. And the other thing that stands out for me is team. And so it's a bunch of people who are bound together by, given that it's a project, a very clear purpose with very clear reasons for connecting to each other, etc. So I'm wondering sometimes, and this is the question that arises for me in this, is linked to this question of fear of retrenchment and having to be everywhere, is the place. We can't connect to the whole organization, it seems to me. It seems too vague. I mean, who connects to Sasol? Or who connects to MTN, or to the University of Johannesburg, or you know, any one of those ESCOM. Well, you don't really. You connect to a smaller place, but then you need some kind of security there where you are, because otherwise you now have to go beyond your team and attend that meeting and attend that meeting and be drawn into all sorts of things that are actually irrelevant to what is possible, a team purpose or a project purpose. That's just questions that arise for me. I more and more lose faith in the largeness of organizations, because I think the larger it becomes, the more you can become lonely and disappear. But if it becomes small as a team or a project, then you're not lonely and you don't disappear.
How was the conversation in the other breakaway room?
I popped in there for a while, and Natasha had some interesting points. I wonder if you're willing to share, Natasha. I was only there for like 4 minutes, but it went towards, what if you have a very young millennial type workforce who doesn't have a work, who doesn't have a work network already? You know, the longer you've worked, the more you actually know people in the industry and in different organizations. And anyway, Natasha, but there was much more than that. Would you mind sharing?
Sure. Yeah, so I did touch on that. I do have a very young workforce, millennial, Gen Z, and that's where the problem comes in, is that it's not just about being new to a company, it's being new to an industry and being new to having a job, and you don't have a professional network, and that's really difficult to form in a virtual space. So connection, I mean, if you started out with those connections, it was easy for you to maintain it moving into the virtual space. But if you never did and you're completely new, it's daunting to reach out to people. And I'd like to say impossible to form any sort of real connection. And I was saying that in the work setting, on-site, co-located spaces, if a co-worker that you're very close to comes by and notices that something's off about you, it's easy for you to open up, even if it is just for a second. But now you have to make that intentional call to someone to say, I need to talk. And that's far less likely to happen. So that's just an example of the fact that our younger generations are going to suffer far more greatly, far more worse compared to us, for us to have professional networks inside of the organization, outside of the organization. Of course, we're comfortable.
Sure, that's fascinating. I mean, what's first of all fascinating for me is that when you said, Liezel, Natasha has got something around Generation Z or the millennials, etc. I thought they are going to be the ones who are coping with this, because they are, and this is just a perspective that I've never thought of, is that actually they don't have work relationships. They don't have professional networks. And in many cases, they don't know how to work yet. I remember that time when we employed about, 15 interns. The biggest challenge was just to teach them how work works. And now you're in a space where that's so difficult, and you don't have this connectivity to actually nurture the relationship where deeper levels of trust may develop.
Christo, I wonder on that one. So I'm pushing on late 30s now, and I long for the days when I was the younger generation. But I try to look to myself now. Where might there be something that I might be missing in this avenue as well? So I heard about I think it's like an Apple thing. I think it's called Donut, were specifically designed where they, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but they basically, you install it through Slack or through whatever, and it creates a purposed meeting between you and a randomly selected colleague or number of colleagues for that. It fabricates the water cooler chat basically, so it actually forces you. It's almost like a meeting, it seems. And I've wondered how well the younger generation will identify and almost kind of capitalize on that compared to a older generation. And I also wonder, from my perspective, I'll be the first one to say, yes, I really miss that interaction. But then I also wonder if for somebody who's 21 years old, their world is a different world. Their values are also to some extent different than the older generation. Maybe they experience this not as we think they experience it, in a bad way. Maybe there are also challenges, but maybe they actually identify in different ways and cope with it in other ways that we are unaware of. I wonder if that at all plays anything in this discussion.
Mm. Yeah, the technology and what's the kind of solution that we find, and what's the, I guess it's almost about what's the kind of space that we create, and to what extent do people feel comfortable coming to that space and interacting in that space? You know, whether it's a digital water cooler or a real water cooler, or you know, whatever the inventive thing that we can come up with. And what's the leader's role in that? Natasha, I'm curious. How do you see that? What do you do to involve and engage and make the connection with these young people?
Oh, well, just to start, I mean, I do want to say that it's not that they are uncomfortable with remote working. I think that they are quite comfortable, but just looking at the projection of their career, they may stumble. So just to make that clear, but in terms of assisting them in that way, in the way that they don't actually know they need assistance yet, it's a good balance between, actually, it's flexibility, it's choice. It's saying that we need to come together at set points and we need to see each other in person, and we need to connect, give you exposure to our executive team or our board, executive team or our leadership team. They need to see your face. And I don't know if they have a fear about being out of sight, out of mind. I don't know if they have that fear. But maybe they should, because it is, to an extent, real in some organizations where, you know, we have a slightly old-fashioned way of assessing performance, and it's based on the interactions that people see, maybe not directly, but they see people interacting with other people, and they say, yes, that's the type of person we want to have, you know, having a seat at the table one day. And if you're in a remote setting, you just don't have that much of an opportunity. Not at all, just maybe a reduced opportunity. And maybe they don't know that yet, but they should. So leadership's role is to educate them around that, educate them around building a brand and maintaining a brand in this blended space, and give them the tools to enhance their brand, making them visible in this blended space.
Yeah, interesting, the educational role of leadership. I also wonder if there's, because I think much of this is systemic and structural, if there's a larger requirement for leaders to pull people into, for instance, teams or contexts, and to pull out participation. Ingrid, you mentioned the extent to which you connected on a personal level with the teachers and the other staff members at the school, and how important that is that, and Marie, it goes back for me to the thing that you said, that leaders say, but what's in it for me? Why should I be doing this? And the whole question about what is the role of the leader is are you pulling people into connection? Are you holding people close? Are you introducing them into situations where their value can begin to be seen, where they can show their value, where they can participate, where they can develop the way in which they participate, and doing all that sort of work? Ingrid?
Christo.
Yes.
Sorry,
Daniel.
I came very late, so I had to observe the half an hour of silence and listening. And thank you very much, Liezel, for allowing me to come in, even if I was so late. And I know that I'm also not sitting in a proper place because I was late to book for a place in the house. Everybody else had booked before me, sorry. There are two things which I'm picking up in this discussion. I just want to heighten them a little bit. One is what Christo, you talked about teams and not just the whole universe. You get lonely, lost. And the second point is the role of the leader in building these teams. Now, when I listen to Natasha, of these new people, millennials, it doesn't have to even be a millennial. Just being new in a group, you are making the entire team to be a completely new team. What effort should not be paid? It's to the whole team, which is a new team because of a new person in there. Definitely, as soon as you have one more person or one less person, the dynamics change. And this person who is coming new is bringing a new dynamics. How do we integrate this new dynamics coming from this person and how we respond to this person? That is the task of a leader. The primary role of a leader is to build this climate in this team. Now, when we only talk of big organizations and not breaking them down to these smaller teams where people can be passionate even about one another, that's where our mistake is. And when we talk about leaders, it's not only the executive at the top. Leadership goes all the way down to the every office. There are. It's not necessarily the leader who has been appointed, positional leader, but it can also be anyone who has influence and who takes this space. You put three people together, don't even tell them who is to lead, someone will lead. So this bringing the whole thing together, I think, is the magic one, I would say.
Yeah, there's such an enormous premium on this thing they call inclusivity, of including people and making sure everyone is included. And I guess that requires that we work with smaller units. Because otherwise it's just not personal. We can't really develop the space for vulnerability and for you know, for the willingness to reveal ourselves and to show our weaknesses and to actually try out what may turn out to be our strengths and our talents. It's maybe not apparent yet.
So, I think another thing that came out of our group, and I think Mercy raised that, where they have already returned to the office, which brings in a different dynamic. Mercy, I don't know if you would like to share that with the rest of the group.
What I actually raised was that now everyone is back, so we're battling to adjust to the new normal. We are looking at where we cannot implement successfully flexi hours or the flexibility, because now it becomes difficult to manage people at lower levels. For instance, we are faced with a situation where you would have a mother that has been relying all these years on an aftercare. And because of the COVID, the aftercares are closed. So now we need to accommodate this mother to say, okay, between this time and this time, you can go and then come back. Because I think of what has already been mentioned, the trust dynamics and all others, we are battling to actually make time for that. Management cannot afford to trust you because they're not sure if you're going to come back, or if you're gone, you're gone. So it's one of those. And then as a result, you end up having back-to-back meetings that would end up around 8 in the evening. So it's becoming difficult to adjust in the new normal. And as a result, you then have people that are just saying, okay, because management or the organization cannot accommodate me as a mother, let me just put myself in a corner and mute. So these are just those dynamics that we're having or that we're facing.
Possibilities.
People's actual contexts have changed dramatically. And this has a huge impact on how they engage with the rest of the organization or with their team or with whomever.
And working from home brought a lot of freedom. That going back takes away that freedom. Spending time in traffic, wearing shorts and slacks, getting up and interacting with the family between meetings, if you're lucky. And moving back is going to take a lot of that away, and that's going to be a period of adjustment again for the workforce.
Yeah.
And also, just in addition to that, as a result of all these challenges, people are now dreading to come back because, you know, you go back, but you just go back because you need to be paid, and you just don't want the system to just scrap you off and forget about you. So, yeah.
Out of sight, out of mind, that like is playing out really, really practically for you, Mercy. Wow. I would be afraid too.
Yeah, I guess we have, and some of us more than others, deep fears of becoming disconnected, becoming forgotten, becoming neglected. You know, for the Enneagram, especially the Enneagram 9s are, like, that's a primary fear, is that people will actually forget that I exist. And then, of course, they act in such a way that people forget that they exist. And some of the others as well, Enneagram 5s, I think, can get into their hole and so on. But it's a deep and fundamental fear, and then we react, and it seems as if we're struggling to find purpose, struggling to figure out, well, you know, beyond we need to have an income, is why are we doing the work that we are doing? I'm just thinking of David Graeber's idea of bullshit jobs. I wonder how many of us actually came to the clear conclusion that our jobs were bullshit jobs. that the world would actually not be worse off if our jobs were not done. And actually, in some cases, as in many bureaucratic jobs, the world would be slightly better off if someone didn't do our job. Which is disconcerting, because it asks profound questions about our own connectedness to our economic world and our social world, and where we fit in, what we do.
Christo, what I find quite interesting in what you're saying is what is it that we talk when we now go back to the office? What is our entry discussions? And I'm shocked by the number of organizations that I support that when they went back, their first talk is how much they lost in terms of revenue and so on. We need to do this and that. And nobody talks about all these fears, all these new normal challenges, all this, that. These are pushed on the side as personal issues, but these are the issues that eat my time, that eat my feelings, that eat my productivity. But this thing of only looking at the organization as, and you ask the question, who is this organization? We are all part of this organization. Instead of starting with us and look into the issues that we have in the environment, and therefore how do we tackle the issues in our own environment and the work environment and the everything, and in the different levels of systems. Let's replan afresh and see how we move on. How do we build the so-called new normal? How do we build it together so that we are all motivated, contained, and feel part of? You see, these are the things that leadership in many organizations that I see have not thought of. Unfortunately, I mainly work with governments, so maybe it's much better in private sector.
Well, I wouldn't put my money on it.
Yeah, neither would I.
And just in addition to what has been said, imagine if you are a street sweeper, a general worker, and you've always felt your job is of a lesser value than the people that are sitting in the offices. And now the new normal happens. You are expected to sweep whether you're having challenges or you're not having challenges. And the fact that we are not discussing how do we then move forward with what has happened, it's just making their jobs more worthless. And they just saying, oh well, I just don't want to not belong anywhere because I am a 25-year-old and I need to survive.
So we basically, in Maslow's, what some people say he never made a hierarchy out of it. But in the Maslow needs, we are at survival level. And that's where many of us operate from. And it's, and we'll do whatever it takes in this time. But we're not going to make big promises of belonging or connection. So what are we to do? What are we to do? Where does it leave us as early practitioners? What's our work? I see we have about 5 minutes left.
A random thought came to mind, Christo, and we're talking about connection and making connection and building connection. But I thought about pen pals and before technology and how people were able to connect across vast spaces of land and very big intervals of silence before the next message came, but yet couples managed to get together like that. I wonder if we're not spoilt and our expectations are different, or because it's a world of instant gratification, we no longer have the patience or excitement for that next message to land. What's missing there that is causing us not to connect, even though we have all of the tools at our fingertips all of the time?
So it's so interesting. I think back again, Ingrid, to what you said about the interpersonal connections and the effort to actually go and make interpersonal connections. I think sometimes we expect these things from organizations and we expect these things from leaders. And of course, if you're a leader, then I guess it's really, you should perhaps think about making connections. But that's what it comes down to. It comes down to people reaching out on a personal level to make a connection. Nathaniel, that and what you said about coming back into the workplace, and we're already thinking about what's the economic loss, etc., etc. Of course, we must think about those things. But it's almost as if we're operating in unreality and we are refusing to be where we are. We're refusing to stop and to say what's happening in everyone's heart. What are all the fears that everyone is experiencing? What is happening to the quality of connections? What is happening actually in our world right now? And I also have a sense that this Tetris board calendars of ours does not allow that kind of reflection. It forces us into the operational at every single point. It turns our relationships into instrumental relationships. In other words, not relationships between I and you, but a relationship between this role and that role, the manager and the person who reports to the manager, etc. And it seems that we need to slow down. I'm not saying we need to slow down the whole organization, but we need to radically slow down at certain points and create a lot more space for things to actually just emerge. And I don't know if our organizations have the patience for this. I don't know if they have the courage to face the fear of what's going to happen if I don't act and actually just stay there and wait and listen. But maybe that's some of the work that we should be doing. Is the work of slowing down so that we can connect.
Making connecting possible, Christo, that was something that came up for me a lot. And maybe, you know, I was just thinking if your leader is the 9 or maybe the 5 or the whatever Enneagram type, and they don't like connecting and they don't like being social and they don't have that personality, then maybe it becomes up to the people in the teams that do have the personality to bring people together and to say, hey, can we have a check-in before or an extra 10 minutes afterwards just to talk nonsense? I don't know. And I agree with you. Getting caught up in operations, and I think there's so many organizations that's literally in panic mode.
Yeah.
That worrying about connection and people's voices is something that that is seen as soft and not so important right now. So then again, it becomes everybody's responsibility.
Yeah.
Like the culture. This is a very difficult problem to sit with. It's
You're right. It's very difficult because it's It's a cultural issue. It's a
Is
question.
that then, is that then not the work? It's just to help organizations see that many people are in survival, and then just to recontract expectations and then help enable those authentic connections, because it can't be contrived, right? So there need to be authentic connection, and then see what emerges from there.
I think if we speak about new normal, the big challenge with new normal is just a version of old normal, and that's actually more wishful thinking than anything else, because nothing normal has emerged. What is happening is our context is emerging every single day, and that's what we need to cope with. Is we need to actually stop for long enough so that we can pay attention to what is emerging, really emerging, and not what we actually wish was already there, back as it used to be. I guess that's hard. And I guess some teams will get it right and some teams won't. I don't think organizations will get it right. I only think teams will get it right. And I only think that connection will happen between individuals. One person will connect with one other person, or they will connect to two people, or the team will eventually, if it's a small enough team, they will all connect to each other. It will work in that sort of fashion. But there needs to be space for that. It needs to be held in some way. And I think that's the sort of consciousness that we can bring to that as early practitioners. We can ask the questions. I actually think it's all we can do. We can ask the questions. It's not saying that we don't pay attention to the really urgent questions of organization survival and the need to figure out new ways and perform. But Liezel, as you mentioned earlier, there's a lack of motivation, there's a lack of innovation, there's a drop down in new ideas, there's a diminishment of creativity. Wow, surprise. All of those things require connection. And they require trust. And they require people around whom you can be stupid and fail. Because otherwise it's just not going to happen. You're just running from the one KPI assessment into the other. God, you're never going to innovate.
Innovation requires play and diversity of thought, and much looser boundaries. The questions of what could be, what if it wasn't. I think that's being drowned out with these. We meet around a clear purpose with a clear outcome, and not so clear who's supposed to be here, but there's an operational thing that emerges at the end of it, and we'll go on a merry way.
I can tell you what I think. I think teams need to get together physically. They need to get together for at least a day, no shorter. It doesn't have to be in the office. I mean, the weather is beautiful. They can go walking or something. And they need to explore the real questions of why do they exist? What's their purpose? Who are they? Why are they connected? All of those things. I think teams need to do that, and they need to do that. It needs to become part of the cycle. There's a premium on face-to-face meetings, so we must not waste face-to-face meetings on operations. But we must meet face-to-face. We must make them strategic, and we must make them about the community. That's sort of what I want to throw out there. And I know it's difficult for some teams, and not all teams will be able to do it. But if a team can do that, I think it would make a huge difference.
And if they can't, to at least get to know each other better.
Yeah.
I mean,
they must have this kind of a Zoom wine meetings, you know. It's funny thing is people don't get drunk together anymore. There's a lot
Because
of truth.
alcohol is the solution.
There's a lot of truth that happens in those meetings, a lot of revelation, for better or worse. It takes place. I'm not saying people should get drunk. I'm not advising the Dionysian option, but there's something that happens there in the space where you don't plan the conversation, where the conversation is not purposeful, where something can emerge, and where a strange attractor may start to pull together what is emerging, and a new idea may come into existence.
We you know, we have the tools. We believe in, at the beginning of a meeting, let's check in and have a check-in question. And
Yeah.
you know, if at all possible, switch your camera on for those 5 minutes. So if that's maybe a change that some of the companies can make, like the ones that I've been working with, it's literally, I'm going to ask you for your for video time for 5 minutes at the start of each meeting. And have a check-in question.
Yeah.
Some days it's how are you, but some days it's how you feeling about the new level of lockdown. Or, you know, we had for 3-4 months, we had a different check-in question every single morning for our OD check.
Yeah.
It's just conversation, you know.
Yeah.
Brings up. So yeah. I'm a little bit worried about the time.
Right. Maybe we should close the conversation and keep it open for another 20 minutes for whomever wants to continue on the conversation. It doesn't seem like anyone who's on the conversation is burning to get off.
A few has gotten off.
A few has gotten off, yes.
Okay, so thank you everybody for being here. I'm going to just now stop the recording, and then we can have a casual chat for those who wants to hang around.